Alright then, so we should in theory nearly be there with all of these videos. This next one covers the basics of the league structure as well as the game world and important stuff you need to know. So as a bit of an overview of the league, the ZFL is made up of 3 professional leagues, 3 semi-professional leagues, and a bunch of amateur leagues. These divisions can be active or simulated. Active means that we have human players participating in the division, and every team in a division needs to be controlled by a human player for a division to be considered active. There are no playoffs in the ZFL. I've been doing playoff brackets for about 6 years with Rebel, and I've had my fill with them, so there's no playoffs here. The team at the top of the league standings after all matches are played is declared champion. Here's something of an overview of that league structure. So the ZFL Elite Division is the top tier. There's 10 teams in there, and the bottom 2 are relegated. Of course, the team that finishes top of the table is the champion. Beneath that, we have the second division, where there's another 10 teams. The top 2 are promoted to replace the relegated teams from the Elite Division, and the bottom 2 from the second division are relegated to the third division, where there's another 10 teams. The top 2 are promoted there. The bottom 3 are relegated to the semi-professional leagues, which are 3 equally leveled divisions, as you can see there. 14 teams in each of those. The top 1 is promoted. The bottom 2 are relegated to the amateur leagues, which are way off the bottom of this slide. You don't want to be down there. I think the plan really is that we will probably only have, at the absolute maximum, the top 3 divisions ever being a thing, but it very much depends how this goes. It could be that we only ever do 1 division, and that's because this thing could be a hell of a lot of work to manage. So when we get to season end, any team that's in a relegation position will be relegated to the division below. Similarly, any team that's in a promotion position will move to the division above. Pretty straightforward. Should a team with an active coach be relegated, then the coach will only have a chance to retain their job if the division that they would relegate to is also active. So at the moment, we've only got the Elite Division active, and everything beneath that is simulated. So if you're relegated from the Elite Division, the coach will be forced to resign. That coach may then apply for any vacant positions, and we'll include the newly promoted teams in that, so that all of the teams in any active divisions are always controlled by human players. There's prize money as well, so this feeds into the financial ledgers that I talked about in the last videos. Each finishing position in a division has a financial reward assigned to it, so the higher you finish in the table, the more money you earn for your team. That money is paid before the end of the season, and it can help pay off debts on your financial ledger. So, of course, that gives you the option to spend heavily and gamble on ensuring you get a good finishing position in the table. But if you fail to do so, then you can end up putting the team into financial difficulties. As well, any coach that wins a trophy will have that feat recorded in their history forever. Of course, that would be a useful bargaining chip if you're ever looking for a new job, to say you've won a trophy before. Now, there's a few organisations within the game world that you need to be aware of. The first of those is the ZFL. The ZFL is the league organiser, so it is primarily responsible for setting the league rules and other things, including team registration and all that sort of thing. Mostly admin stuff. We've also got the ZUP, the ZUP, that is the ZFL Union of Players. They represent the players by ensuring that there is a suitable working environment in place for the players to do their job most effectively. And finally, we have Bloodlines Magazine. Bloodlines Magazine have exclusive print reporting rights for the ZFL. The magazine will keep you informed of latest events and also provide various roleplay opportunities with things like press conferences and interviews and all that sort of thing. So the ZFL and the ZUP will mostly exist in the background, although you will, quote-unquote, hear from them at certain points. As the league organiser, the ZFL is permitted to make rule changes to the league format as it sees fit, so the rules may not stay the same from season to season. The ZFL are always meant to be neutral and impartial to all 10 teams in the Elite Division, and indeed those in the second and third division and below. But is any organisation ever truly neutral? Meanwhile, the ZUP will mostly be a pain whenever you may need to deal with them. They are responsible for ensuring that players have a good working environment, and that may not always dovetail with what you want to do as a coach. Now, Bloodlines Magazine will be the main hub for league news. At the beginning of each match round, a new edition of Bloodlines will be released in the Discord server to inform you of the latest events going on around the league. Also worth pointing out that news sometimes breaks fast, and occasionally Bloodlines Special Edition bulletins may provide additional news from around the ZFL. But normally the edition at the beginning of each match round is the one you're looking out for. At the moment, I'm planning that match rounds will be bi-weekly, as in one game every 2 weeks, but we'll see how that goes, and eventually this may become weekly. It'll depend how much work it is to manage everything and whether one game per week is realistic. Now, the word events is in bold there. There are initially 4 types of event that can appear in an edition of Bloodlines Magazine. Firstly, there are scripted events. Now, these events are stuff that I've come up with, and these will be fed into the game to help drive narrative at various points of the season. Each of these scripted events will affect all the teams in the league, most likely, and they will require a decision from each coach. Next is player events. These relate to a single player on any team. These are most commonly generated through unhappiness trigger points, but they can generate if players are happy as well. Team events relate to a whole team, and these can be generated for all sorts of reasons that we'll come on to in a moment. And finally, we have coach events. These events relate to a specific coach, and they may be triggered by something the coach has done or said previously during the season. How are events triggered then? Well, scripted events are triggered at my discretion. Each coach will be required to respond to these events, so you can't ignore these ones. You have to provide a response when they appear. Coach events are also triggered at my discretion, and these depend on the actions your coach has taken in the game world. The safest thing to do is to assume that every action that your coach takes will be remembered either by opponents, by players, or by Bloodlines Magazine. And some of these things may come back to reward you in the future, or indeed may come back to bite you in the backside in the future. Now, whenever coach events are triggered, a coach may choose whether or not to engage with the events. A coach has the option always to ignore an event that's labelled as a coach event, but again, doing so may have unintended consequences further down the line. Team events have trigger points that are based on milestones the team hits throughout the season. So on a basic level, it could be winning a certain number of games, scoring a certain number of touchdowns, or anything like that. All of these milestones are hidden and not known to the coach, so not really worth worrying about. They'll just happen as and when they happen. But they function somewhat like secret objectives and penalties, although you'll only find out what they are after the event triggers. Coaches will need to respond to team events when they appear. You can't avoid those ones. And finally, player events have specific trigger points which are variable between players. So every player on every team in the ZFL has a hidden happiness rating and hidden trigger points for both happiness and unhappiness. So some players will only take a small amount of unhappiness in order for them to be able to potentially trigger an event, whereas some players are a lot more thick-skinned and it'll take a lot of unhappiness for them to be able to trigger an unhappiness event. Once a trigger point is reached, the player enters into a pool of happy or unhappy players on an admin spreadsheet. Every round, a die is rolled among the admins to determine how many player events appear. This can be 0. And once that's done, more dice are rolled to select either happy or unhappy players, depending on the result of that original dice roll. So if, for example, in a given round, the die roll says there's going to be 1 player event produced, there'll then be a coin flip to determine whether that's a happy or an unhappy event. And if it was an unhappy event, then if we had 10 players across all teams that were in the unhappy pool, a dice is rolled and 1 event will be triggered for 1 of those 10 players, and it could be on any team. So what that does mean is that you can have unhappy players, and those players may never actually trigger an event, but the more unhappy players you've got, the higher the odds that your team will generate a player event And if it's an unhappy one, it will presumably be a negative thing. Now, with player events, coaches can always choose whether to engage with these events or not. If you feel like your players are just whinging and they need to get over themselves, you can actively ignore whatever it is they're complaining about. But again, that may or may not have consequences further down the line. And when I say it may or may not always have consequences, may not is important as well. It's not a guarantee that there'll be further consequences down the line. So the final thing to mention is the limits on Bloodlines Magazine. And this is just for my own sanity, really. There'll be a weekly limit on how many events we'll generate in Bloodlines each week. Initially, I'm planning on this being between 3 and 5 events covering the whole league. If that proves to not be enough and I can handle it, then we'll increase that number. If your team is involved in an event, you'll be pinged when the magazine is released. You then must respond to the event before playing your match for that round. And responding to the event is basically just DMing me with the actions you want to take, or it may be a quote that's needed from your coach or something like that. Whatever it is, that response is needed before you play your match for that round. So Bloodlines is always released at the start of the round, and then before you play the match in that round, you must respond to any events that you are tagged in. Event resolutions will sometimes be immediate, so occasionally you'll immediately find out what the result of your actions are. Sometimes you'll have to wait for the next edition of Bloodlines. Sometimes you may not find out at all. Sometimes you may find out much further into the season. And resolutions will sometimes be private, which means that you'll be DM'd the result. Sometimes the resolutions will be public, which means that the resolution of that event will go into a public channel on the Discord server, and everyone will find out what happened. Again, that can be good, and that can be bad. Okay, at this point, the plan is that this is the last of the tutorial videos that there'll be. If you are interested in taking part, be sure to join my Discord server, which is available from the link in the description below. Other than that, thank you very, very much for watching. And yeah, we hope to see you soon in the ZFL.